Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Always Bring a Book. On today's episode, I got to chat with the best-selling author Megha Majumdar. We discuss her newest novel, A Guardian and a Thief, why she left her job at Catapult Books to pursue writing full-time, and why writing her second novel was harder than the first. I'll play a quick clip from that second book and then roll the interview. If you don't subscribe to the podcast yet, you should. That way you'll know when new episodes come out. And if you already follow, thanks. Consider dropping a rating on whichever platform you use. Thanks for listening.
From the storeroom hidden under the stairs, Ma fetched a cup of rice and a sack of eggs speckled gray like the moon, then cooked, standing before the stove's blue fire, her eye upon the window and its dusk, in which bats swooped and the neem tree shivered, and a figure down on the road pedaled a bicycle, whistling, as if everything was all right. Thief, thought Ma. Who else but a person who had chanced upon fresh vegetables or fruit would wander the city of Kolkata in this ruined year? The heat, a hand clamped upon the mouth, the sun, a pistol against one's head, and recall a song. She watched to see what the thief would do. He pedaled past. But Ma saw a different reality shimmer into being, in which he leaned his bicycle against the wall, climbed the pipes like a toddy tapper, and appeared at her window. In that picture, the thief was a collector of local information, dutiful in his neighborhood eavesdropping, shrewd in following what he heard about the bins of onions and carrots, the sacks of lentils and rice, the bags of raisins and cashews hidden in the dark fist of the house, stolen by Ma from donations made to the shelter where she worked, while the city outside wept for a handful of something to eat.
Today's guest is Megha Majumdar, the award-winning author of A Burning and the national bestseller A Guardian and a Thief, which came out in October of 2025, and is an Oprah's Book Club pick, a finalist for the National Book Award, and many more. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig.
No problem. I will do my best. I am no Oprah, so bear with me. But for listeners who may be new to your work, can you tell us a bit about what your newest novel, A Guardian and a Thief, is about?
A Guardian and a Thief is set in my hometown of Kolkata, India, and it imagines a near future in which the city has been wrecked by the effects of climate change. There is a shortage of food. And in this crisis situation, two families who are each seeking to protect their own children, get their own children to safety, come into conflict. That's, I guess, the book in one line. It's a novel which is interested in the future of food. It's interested in immigration. It's very interested in moral questions of what do we do when our love and our sense of who we are as moral beings are opposed.
Yeah, I just read it, and it felt beyond timely in like sad way, but also just in like a really powerful way. This book is often described as reading like a thriller, which it's not, or at least not, I don't think so, because it's, tense, it's full of reversals and twists, and you're never really sure who to root for. Your structure is over 7 days, which creates a real sense of like urgency. Why did you decide to compress the timeline like that rather than like a longer or more open-ended narrative?
That's a great question. I really wanted to focus on a period of time where I could sustain that thriller-like tension and suspense. I could sustain those questions of what will happen to each family? Will they get what they want? And I also wanted a period of time where I could show the characters changing in meaningful ways. So it couldn't be 24 hours. I needed to show these characters finding themselves doing things that would have been shocking to them before this timeline, before this crisis. So 7 days felt like a good amount of time to balance both of those. And, it's so funny that you ask because it actually took me a lot of work to get to 7 days. For a long time, I was fixated on 10 days being the timeline.
Interesting.
And I tried to make 10 days work for so long. And it was just wobbly. And there were pieces of it that were just, dull and boring. And it took me
Just to
so
get to that
long
10
to
days.
see. Yes.
What was it about 10 days that you were aiming for?
I had a lot more events which were not working. For instance, I spent so long writing about a vertical farm, which I ultimately totally cut out. I spent so long writing about a robbery at a hotel, which I then completely cut out. So I had these scenes which for a long time I believed were key in the story, and then they weren't really.
Was that through like a conversation with an editor or just your own work beforehand?
It was just my own process of reading, rereading, trying to gather the courage to say, I may have spent months working on this, but I have to throw it away. That feeling of you see the work that has gone into it and you kind of want to hold on to it. But at some point, you have to occupy the perspective of the reader and say, this is not interesting.
Do you think any of those things that you spent so much time on will find their way to a different story or a short story, or are they just part of the process and now they're done?
I think they will forever be hidden in my drafts. I don't really write short stories right now. I've been going from novel to novel.
Mm.
So for me, I think they are very much part of the process of necessary failure that you have to go through to finish a novel.
In the book, the characters are referred to as these intimate family names like Ma and Dadu, and it made me feel close to them like immediately. Like chapter one, you're like invested in these folks' stories. What was behind the decision to use those kind of like kinship titles? What did you want that to do emotionally for the reader?
That's a great question. There are some elements of writing where you trust your writerly intuition, and it's hard to find a justification for it. I guess when I'm thinking about it, I recall that when I first started writing, I was really writing very close to the perspective of the child who is in the book. And so I was writing the people in relation to her. So Ma is her mother, Dadu is her grandfather. That's how I named them. And as I went on, I think it felt right to have those be the names. And perhaps there's something there about the bonds of family, which the book is interested in, the bonds of love for the people who are closest to you, which, is a love that can be very mysterious. And so perhaps making those bonds primary in the book felt crucial in some way.
Speaking of things that felt pretty crucial in the book, you've spoken about wanting to show how funny people in Kolkata can be, even in moments of fear and crisis and food shortage, and the sidewalk is so hot that you can't touch it. How do you approach writing humor into a story that's so harrowing as this one? And like, why did you feel that was important, to add into this book?
I think one of the things that I love about Kolkata, my hometown, is how funny people are. And it felt like in order to write this future in which people do have resilience and they do have the strength needed to meet this crisis, part of that resilience and strength is their sense of humor, is their ability to laugh at problems and to remember that the networks of dependence, the networks of friendship, I don't know how to put it, the networks of, knowing your neighbors, knowing the person who runs the shop at the corner, knowing the person who plies a rickshaw in your neighborhood. These relationships are relationships which become activated in a crisis, in a problem. But part of how those relationships are nurtured in everyday life is through jokes. You see them, you say something, they say something funny about how their day is going. So humor is very much a part of how people nurture relationships and find intimacy.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's pretty early on in the book. When they first get the passports, the grandfather is like, "Well, if mine tore, I could stay behind and like almost like I can tell people what's going on here and all the funny things that are happening and like keep recording it." Like even though things were so rough, like he felt so connected to the community still. And it really shines through. So you mentioned this earlier that, the book wasn't really working in the beginning, that you were writing tons and tons of stuff and ended up even throwing out like hundreds of pages. And what did you learn about the book from like the original sort of failed version that like still lives on in the final one?
I think I learned to listen to the book, which sounds kind of strange and mystical, but I think that now looking back, there were so many points where I tried to make the book something it didn't want to be. And that's why it wasn't working. I had this idea of what elements belong in such a book. And the book wanted to be something a little more intricate and a little more surprising. It was, for instance, in this finished book, a central element of the book is a house.
Mhm.
There is a house at the center of the book which belongs to one family, and another family makes a claim on it. And the house was always there, but it took me so long to figure out that it had to move to the center rather than being at the periphery. So I think a little bit of it is being open to the story making very sharp and surprising turns, and listening to what the book is trying to tell you when it's doing that.
That's so awesome. I've really, I think we were talking before we started recording that, I've interviewed tons of authors over the years. And I don't know if I've ever heard an author talk about a book like this. You mentioned it was like strange or mystical, but like you said it right from the beginning, like the book is interested in doing this. It's almost like a partner or something, like a partnership or something. Like you listen to the book is interested versus like you are the book, like you wrote it. So it's like, you were interested in.
Yeah,
I really love the way you talk about it.
I appreciate that.
What was the biggest like conceptual change that you made with the book? You just mentioned like bringing the house to the center, but was there anything else like a relationship shifting or a timeline adjustment or like a
Mhm.
character being added or removed that kind of helped it finally click into its final form?
Oh, there were so many huge changes. When I first started writing the book, I was writing the main character was a child of 10 or 11, and the plot was completely different. It had this child going in search of a rumored market to fetch fruits and vegetables for her grandparents who were staying at home. So it was just completely different. And then the child became much younger. The parent and the grandparent became more active. For a long time, I wrote a friend character, a friend to this child. And I wrote so many scenes of the two of them together. And I realized that something about those scenes never felt true to me, perhaps because, I was trying to stay close to the perspective of a 11-year-old, and that has its limits, right? Like you can't write about the world in as complex a way, or I wasn't able to do it. Um, so I felt a little limited in that. So then I realized that that's actually a constraint which is not interesting for me. I want to do away
Mm.
with it. So the friend went away. The child became smaller, so that she could still hold the heart of the book, but the knowledge of the world of this book did not have to be limited to her knowledge. It could be her
Mm.
parents' knowledge, it could be her grandparents' knowledge, and that would allow me to write about the world more fully. So, yeah, it's such a fascinating question that you ask, because I think so much of the process really is going towards what is invigorating for me, and realizing where the complexity and the energy of the book lies. And sometimes the characters that you've made yourself are holding you back from reaching that complexity.
That's so interesting. I've heard you talk about this before too. It was part of the change because you had recently become a mother. Was that accurate?
Yes, yes. That was a big um shift. Do you have kids?
I do, just one, yeah.
How old?
16.
Ooh, oh my God. Okay, you
Yeah.
are you are past the chaos years.
I
Or
wouldn't say
perhaps no.
just different types of chaos.
Okay, different types of chaos. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, well, so the kind of earth-shattering change that occurs in your life when you have a child. And I think that having a child really helped me think about the core of this book differently, because I became so interested in that relationship of a parent and a child. And it's enacted in two ways in the book. There's, of course, the toddler and her mother, but there's also the mother and the mother's father, who is an elderly man at this point. And to write those two parenting relationships, those two relationships of care and protection and guardianship.
Mm.
I think I was only able to do that because of my experience of becoming a parent.
You've said that A Burning felt more straightforward to write and that this novel felt harder. And I'm learning that some of the reasons it was harder. But um what was it that was more difficult? Was it the subject matter or the form or like maybe your expectations that for yourself since your first book was so successful? Or was it like something else entirely? Like what made the first one more straightforward?
The first one, I felt like I knew the whole story. I just had to write it. The second one, I felt like I knew the world, I knew the moral dilemma that interested me, I knew the characters somewhat, but I had to work a lot harder to find the story. And the story changed so much. It kept revealing a version of itself to me. And I would think, okay, I figured it out. This is the story. And then I would write, let's say, 60 pages in one direction, and then realize that this is not the right direction. So the story changes again. And then I write, 60 pages in another direction. And then I realize that this is not right either. So there were a lot of turns like that where I wrote, 60 to 80 pages of a certain kind of plot, and then realized that this is not right.
Wow. So to shift gears for a second here, I always find it so interesting to find to learn about kind of authors' journeys. And I read that, when your first novel published, you were the editor at Catapult, where you were later then promoted to editor in chief. But then in 2022, you left that role to focus on writing full time. What did that feel like at the time? I imagine both like liberating, but also probably scary. How did you know you were ready to take that leap?
You know, um, the completely frank answer is that I got a grant. I got a grant from a foundation called the Whiting Foundation. They do a lot of good work supporting writers. So I got a Whiting grant, um, which allowed me for the first time to think, what can I do if I center writing in my life? I grew up middle class, my parents had jobs. I never imagined that I could have a life in which I don't have a 9 to 5.
Mm.
I always imagined that I would have a 9 to 5 and then I would kind of write in the mornings, I would write late at night. And that's how I wrote my first book. But getting the Whiting grant, it allowed me to think about, well, what happens if I take a chance on myself? And that was also soon after I'd had my first child. So I was trying to do three things. I was trying to be a good parent. I was trying to do my editorial job at Catapult, which I loved. It's a fantastic press, publishing a lot of great writers. So I loved being at Catapult, and I was also trying to write this novel. And I had this feeling that I can do two of these things well, but I don't know that I can do all three things well. And the grant gave me the courage to think, what if I focus on writing and parenting for a little bit? What happens if I use my full brain on writing rather than when I'm exhausted at 10 p.m. I try to write?
Were your parents like, what the hell are you doing? You have this secure job. Like, you're going to be a writer? Like, or were they like, how did that conversation?
You know, they were, contrary to every stereotype, my parents have always been very, very supportive of whatever I wanted to do. In college, I studied anthropology, and for a while, I thought I wanted to be an anthropologist, and they were supportive of that. And then I wanted to work in books as an editor. They were supportive of that. So my parents have always been very trusting of my wishes, and they've really encouraged me to write if I wanted to write. So I had their support, which was huge.
Yeah.
And the grant gave me the courage to try writing. And I don't know that I would have finished this book if I had not focused on the book in that way.
I know how the book's being received by the public. How's the book being received by the supportive parents?
Oh, they're very happy. They are so unfamiliar with the world of publishing, or what it means to get reviews, or even like what it means to do an interview like this. They are just completely removed from it, so they think that all of this is incredibly special and joyful and meaningful. And sometimes they'll send me clips that their friends sent them of like a review that they saw or something like that. So it's very joyful.
That's amazing. I love that. So I always end these interviews asking for a kind of a recommendation, but not necessarily a book recommendation, but just like a good thing, something that's bringing you joy right now. It can literally be anything.
Ooh, well, I think something that brought me joy this past weekend was making a very simple guacamole with my older son. We made guacamole together, and I also reread Katie Kitamura's book Audition, which I really loved. Have you read Audition?
I've heard of it, but I haven't
so
read it yet.
good.
Now
so
I'm going to have to,
good.
though.
Yes, and don't read anything about it. Just go into the book. So I would say reading Audition and making some guacamole with somebody you love, and then eating all of the guacamole.
That might be my favorite answer I've ever gotten yet. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know it's only been about 4 months since you published your newest novel, but what can we expect from you next?
Oh, I'm working on a new novel very, very slowly, but I am deep in it, and I'm excited.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure we'll all grab it when it comes out. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your really thoughtful questions. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to that interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really excited about the next one. I got to interview Michael Finkel, author of The Art Thief, which was one of my favorite nonfiction books that I've read in the past few years. So my recommendation for this week is just Michael Finkel books. He has a few out now, and they're all really interesting and worth the read. So run to your local bookstore and check those out. That episode will come out in about 2 weeks from today. So keep an eye out. Thanks for listening.